Yo, 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 what's the deal? What's the deal? What's the word? It's your boy Williams Powell, and I'm back at you with the Diamonds for You podcast. I had a thought this week, and I wanted to share it with y'all. I was thinking to myself, like, every time I look up, there's something going on that's a trial and tribulation in my life. Right when I find peace in one specific area of life, some sort of uproar or disruption arises in another area. And this been going on with me for about 4 years straight. And I was just thinking to myself, like, man, at a certain point, stuff got to get better. But what started ringing in my mind is this. Sometimes God's plan is worked out through a chain of bad events happening, or what appears to be bad events. Like, I used to think like I was supposed to exactly know what God's plan is. But as I live and as I learn and as I go through different things, I'm starting to believe that we find out God's plan as we live and trust Him. I kind of feel like God's plan for our lives is like a Polaroid picture, like how they used to be back in the days. You snap the picture, it disperses out, and then it takes a few minutes to develop where you can see what actually shot it captured. I feel like that's how it is with learning what God's will and what His plan is. Because if we knew all the specific details of what we would have to go through and knew all the specific details of what God was actually doing, then where would faith kick in at? Where would trust in God kick in at? One of my favorite stories of the Bible, like all those that know me close know I talk about this a lot, is Joseph. Joseph had the dream that his family would have to bow to him one day. But I don't think Joseph knew at all the details that would have to take place and all the things he would have to go through that would have to take place in order for that dream to come to pass. I talk about this a lot, man, but it's a story that amazes me over and over again. He tells his brothers the dream, and then this brings out their jealousy, envy, and hate towards him, and then they take him away and sell him as a slave. Then he prospers as being a slave, but then his slave master wife has some sort of sexual interest in him, which he didn't want to submit to. Boom, now she lying and saying he raped her. Now he ends up in prison. And it's just something to think about. Like we as believers, a lot of times we expect life to go smooth sometimes, but that rockiness and that turbulence is what's actually getting us there to that place that God has us to go. After all the things that Joseph went through, even being forgotten, because the person who was restored to their position forgot about Joseph. So we don't even know how long that was, because he was supposed to put in a good word for Joseph with the Pharaoh. He forgot about Joseph, So Joseph went through trials and tribulations, rejection, prison, slavery, all this type of stuff. But it all was working together for his good, for him to become the right-hand man to the Pharaoh, a ruler. I always think about that when I'm going through turbulent times in life, or when I'm going through trials and tribulations that's taken a very long time for me to find peace in. I always think about Joseph, and I always try to remind myself that God has a plan, and everything that's going on with my life being in God's hand, I have to trust that what's going on is getting me to the place that God wants me to be. Joseph is like the prime example of having to trust God through the bad for a long period of time. The Bible lets us know, and biblical scholars believe that this process from the pit to the palace was a 13-year process. So just think about that. That should let you know, like, we should be not weary in well-doing, for in due season we'll reap if we faint not. This your boy Williams Powell, and I want to thank you for stopping by the Diamonds for You podcast today. If you haven't yet, I want you to click the link in my description and drop your emails and receive that free PDF. And I want you to stay in touch with me. And, I want you to, reach back out to me and let me know what you think, Right now, we just speaking from the heart, about subjects that's heavy on our heart and sharing jewels with people, that may be going through dark times or maybe looking for answers and just looking for some comfort in the darkness. That's what we're here for. But I want you to put your email and that link, click that link from my stand story and put your email in there. And I want you to stay connected with me, you know what I'm saying? And once you drop your name and email in that link, you're going to receive a free PDF. And I just want you to, just stay in contact with me. And I appreciate you stopping by. Thank you from Williams Powell and the Diamonds for You podcast. We out.